such a pleasure to welcome everybody here.
Mazel tov to all the Messiah.
Mazel tov to everybody here.
How exciting it is that we have come this far.
Congratulations.
Mazel tov to everyone tonight celebrating.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov to all of you.
Mazel tov to all of you.
I've made it to yet another Siyum.
This is an amazing accomplishment.
To see it happening in front of my eyes.
To empower and inspire so many women.
It's one of the things that makes this truly an amazing thing.
We have become quite a community.
This is an amazing community.
We have like a real routine around this.
Yeah, I've started to understand the rhythm of it.
I've slipped behind many times.
But I keep going one day at a time.
The study of Daf Yomi was the most healing part of my day.
As a whole, it's a sweeping, magical ride.
It's an amazing thing that we should allow more young women to do.
And I wish you many continued years of successful Torah learning.
Lahadio Torah Ulahadira.
May our learning go from strength to strength.
And may you enjoy your learning tremendously.
Thank you and good luck to us all.
And really, b'hatzlacha, I think this is going to be a great challenge.
A huge thank you to Rabbanit Michelle for taking us on this incredible journey.
Mazel tov to everybody. And thank you for all of you for being part of this. And as you all see, everybody brings their part to the table. And thank you to everybody. Mazel tov.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thank you, Maggie, for that amazing video. Great to be here. Great to welcome you all. Okay, great to welcome everybody here to our Siyum Seder Moed, Siyum Chagigah. For those who are finishing Chagigah, Mazel tov. For those who are finished all of Seder Moed, Mazel tov. For those who came just to watch and to be part of this amazing learning experience, don't feel bad that you haven't done it. First of all, you can always start tomorrow with Yavama. And we're super excited to have you here. We have a great program tonight. We're going to start with learning the last daf as usual. We're going to move from there to do the Hadran. I'll just tell you now, and maybe I'll actually say right before we do the Hadrons exactly how to work the Hadrons, because it's a little bit different whether you're going to be saying Chagigah and Seder Moed or just Chagigah. Kind of fill in the blank as you go, depending on what you're up to. And then we're going to have a little bit of a presentation from our tapestry, and then we're going to hear from a bunch of wonderful speakers. So with that, we're going to get started with our daf. Okay. We were in the middle of a section, as usual. Dafim never end exactly where you want them to end. So a little bit of background. We've been learning about we ended the issue with, we're talking about it's a very interesting issue about the time people came for the holidays to the temple. They basically ended up in the situation where there were people that weren't trusted when it comes to Tum'ah and Ta'ara with purity and impurity. And then there were the Chavirim who were trusted. And there was this issue all the time about not trusting. And in the end, the rabbis decided, first they said, well, we have to restrict the Amei Haaretz and we have to assume that everything they touch is not pure. But then they said, when it comes to the holidays, we're going to ignore all of that. And basically everything's okay. However, as soon as the holiday ends, well, we got to clean up everything because they've touched all sorts of things. And we now have to go back. And even though over the holiday it was all good, at this point we have to go back and we have to say, purify everything. So now the Gemara basically was trying to figure out one thing they told them was don't touch the table, because if you touch the table, we're going to have to put the table in the mikvah, and we can't do that because the table always has to be there. So in the end, we say, they say, don't touch the table. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. Why can't you touch the table? The table is meant to be there permanently, and things that are permanent that are made of wood, as opposed to metal, things are permanent that are made of wood. Basically, if they're stationary, then there's no issue. So the Gemara said, they weren't stationary because every time the holidays came, they would lift up the table to show the miracle of the lechem hapanim that it never got stale. I'm just reviewing all the stuff to get you back to where we're up to. Then they said, but wait, doesn't it go by the cover? The table, if you ever saw the pictures of the table, the shulchan, it was gold. And we follow the cover, the part that goes over, not the inside. So then they said, well, there's a debate a little bit about maybe if it's really important what's underneath, and this was a special kind of wood, then maybe you would go by the wood. But then came they said, well, according to Rabbi Yochanan, though, it doesn't matter how important it is, you always go by the cover. So that's what we're up to, and they want to come up with a reason. So the Gemara says, very bottom of Kaf Vav Amud Bet, Ela shane shulchan. The shulchan is different. Derachmana karye eitz. The Torah called it eitz. Okay, it's not exactly the Torah. It's Yechezkel. Yechezkel has this vision of what the temple is going to look like in the future. And it's called wood, even though it's covered with gold, right? If you ever saw the table, it's all gold. You wouldn't call it wood, but it's called wood. So therefore, this is a unique exception to the rule. How do we know this? Dichtiv. HaMizbeach eitz, the altar, which is really not the altar, it's the shulchan. It's a little bit confusing. We'll see that in a minute. But the altar, which is really the table, is wood. Shalosh amot gavoa. It's talking about its height is 3 cubits high. Ve'orko shtayim amot. Its length is 2 cubits. U'mitzvotav lo v'orkotav. V'kirotav eitz. Ve'orko v'kirotav eitz. All of the sides are wood. Vayidaber elai. And God spoke to me saying, Zeh hashulchan asher lifnei Hashem. Okay, there you have it. It's called wood. Now we know it's the table because it said, this is the table. And now it says, first of all, something strange about this verse. It says, patach b'mizbeach v'siyam b'shulchan. Why did the verse start with an altar and then end with a table? Rabbi Yochanan v'Rish Lakish ta'amrei travayu. They both said, Bizman shebeit hamikdash kayam, mizbeach mechaper al adam. Who remembers the end of Moed Katan when we talked about the whole idea that all of a sudden they're in a time without the temple anymore and things are all different and they had to talk about, well, what kind of replaces the temple? And it's something that comes up a lot in the Talmud because we're talking about the time soon after the temple was destroyed. So here they tell us, well, this verse is to teach you, and interestingly, because Yechezkel is right in the time of the destruction, when the temple is around, the Mizbeach is what atones for people. So why do they interchange Mizbeach and Mizbeach and the altar and the table? To teach you, Achshav shulchano shel adam mechaper alav. A person's table atones for him. That's a fascinating statement in and of itself, right? At the end of Masechet Moed Katan, if you remember, we talked about what was the replacement. It was number one, the Beit people. It was talking about people who go from the Beit Knesset to the Beit Midrash. We have the shul, the prayer, which is always considered the substitute for the temple, and we had learning, which all the time the rabbis talk about because that's their world, the learning world. So now it brings in something totally different, which is your table, right? If you think about Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim, right? This is the Gemilut Chasadim element. The Hachnasat Orchim, bringing people to your table. A few other interpretations, we're not going to get off on them, but most people think this is talking about inviting people to your table. So that's how we atone, by having guests over, right? I was struggling with this because I thought to myself when I learned this, I said, we haven't had guests in so long with Corona. We're not in good shape. But anyway, God willing, we'll all go back to that soon. Now the Gemara continues and goes back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah told us that Kol HaKelim Shebamikdash Yesh Lahem Shniyim Ushlishim. There were replacements, there were doubles, triples, they had all these extras in store. So then it said, except for the Mizbachot, the altars didn't need replacement. Why not? Well, Rabbi Eliezer had said in the Mishnah, because they're like karka, they're like the ground because they're in the ground, okay? This is more the big altar, okay? The small altar is the incense altar, which was inside the sanctuary. We'll see in a minute where we get that from. It was more mobile. But the big altar was really not mobile. It was 30 cubits by 30 cubits, very large, or 31, 32, whatever. We'll get into all the dimensions after. Some parts jut out. Anyway, it was very large. So because it's karka, so that's what it says. We're going to deal right now with Rabbi Eliezer. In a minute, we'll get to the rabbis who say something different. Mizbach hanachoshech tichtiv. Now, how do we know it's like the ground? Because it says, Mizbach adama ta'aseli. Okay, which says it's going to be a mizbach of the ground. So there you have it. It's like the ground. And therefore, anything like the ground, it has to, in order to become impure, it has to be a vessel. This isn't a vessel. It's part of the ground. Mizbach hazahav dichtiv ha'menorot va'mizbachot. Because it says mizbachot in plural, it shows all the mizbachot are the same. I'm not going to get into what it says menorah in singular. And the mizbachot, I read it wrong. So the mizbachot are plural, which means we're going to learn one from the other. So even though the other one was very small, it was 1 by 1 cubit and some height, but it was 1 by 1 cubit long and wide. It was very small, but we make a comparison. Now comes this very strange line. The rabbis had said, as opposed to Rabbi Eliezer, who said the reason we don't tovel them and they don't become impure is because they're like the ground. The rabbi said it's because they're covered. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? It doesn't make sense to say if they're covered. Now, one thing I didn't mention before is that wood that's not mobile is not susceptible to impurity. But metals that are not mobile are susceptible to impurity. So the Gemara says, Adrabah, if the rabbis are saying because they're covered, it should be the opposite. It's not giving a reason why they don't have to be tovel. Since they're covered, they should become susceptible to impurity because it goes by the cover. To which they say, they changed what the rabbis say. This happens a lot. Actually, they meant to say the opposite. Really, it's impure. It is impure. Both the mizbachot become impure because they're covered with gold. And that's why it doesn't matter that they're stationary. They're covered with gold. It goes by the gold. Alternatively, Rabbi Eliezer comes. Maybe they're talking according to Rabbi Eliezer. What they're saying is like this. Why do you think? Because they're like the ground. Mishum de mitzupim. Because you think, okay, so now you have to look in Rashi to help understand this. Rashi says, that you learn the reason. You said it's because it's the ground, but you didn't really need that. Why? Because it's wood, and wood is stationary. So because of that, it shouldn't be susceptible to impurity. But he says, and then you needed, right? Because of that, you don't need the word adama. So now you said adama. Why? Is it because you think mishum de mitzupin, and then they should be susceptible to impurity theoretically because they're metals? And then you had to come and say, oh no, but there's an exception because of adama. Well, you're wrong, because mivtal batil tzipuyan gabayu, just like we learned from Yechezkel, the covering doesn't count. It's the eitz that's important. We saw, by the way, even though it said mizbeach and it meant shulchan, it did say mizbeach eitz. So from there they learn we go by the mizbeach, by the wood. Okay? So the rabbis are either disagreeing and they think it actually could become impure, or they're disagreeing and saying your logic is based on something that doesn't make sense. You think it goes by the outside, it really goes by the inside. We're now going to end, Amar Rabbi Elazar. We're now going to end with these two statements that are very typical kind of statements for the end of a Masechet, and then we're going to kind of make sense of all this and what do all these disjointed things have to do with each other. Talmidei Chachamim ein or shel Gehenom sholetet bahem. When it comes to Talmidei Chachamim, the fire of Gehenom does not get to them, the fire of hell. Why not? Kavachomer misalamandra, from a salamander. Okay, the rabbis believe there's all these midrashim about salamanders. This comes up in Greek mythology also. Salamanders were created from fire. So now, mas salamander, it's not clear if this is exactly a salamander the way we call salamanders, or this was something else, or some mythical creature. Mas salamandra, shetoledet eshi, it comes from fire. It was created from fire. Hasach midama, now if you put blood from a salamander on your body, I wouldn't try this, but apparently they believed, ein or sholetet bo, it's not flammable. So if that's the case, Talmidei Chachamim shekol gufan esh, Talmidei Chachamim themselves are fire. What does this remind us of? All the Elisha ben Avuya stories and the Arbash Nechnesu L'Pardes and how much fire we had talking about that, right? There's a lot of fire going on there. Their whole body is esh. How do we know that? Because it says, Halo kod dvarai ke'esh nu Hashem. My words are like fire, and therefore they're burning with fire. Al acha kama v'kama. All the more so, the fire of Gehenom will not get to them. They're not flammable, so the fire of Gehenom can't get to them. So let's just go back for a minute. We had the Hachnasat Orchim, bringing in guests. Then we had the Torah learning. So, right, if we ended the last Masechet with going to Shul, right, the Beit HaKnesset and the Beit Midrash, here we have the Gemilut Chasadim and the Beit Midrash. Okay, so if we think of those three things that the world is standing on, Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim, we have all three combined between the two Masechtot. But now we get a very strange one all of a sudden. They now say the Or of Gehenom doesn't get to the sinners of Israel. Strange, right? Sinners, you would think, who else does it get to? We're going to learn it from the Mizbeach, the golden Mizbeach. It just had a very thin layer of zahav, of gold. And it never got destroyed by the fire that was going all day long, every single day. So, Poshei Yisrael shemeleim mitzvot kirimon, d'chtiv kepelach harimon rakatech, al tikrei rakatech el rekanim shebach. They say like this: Poshei Yisrael are full of mitzvot. Even the bad people of the Jews, they're still doing mitzvot, and they're full of mitzvot like a pomegranate. What does this remind you of? Remember Elisha ben Avuya? Remember what Rabbi Meir, what they say to support Rabbi Meir in the heavens when they won't bring Rabbi Meir's Torah, God won't speak his Torah. And this rabbi, who is it, Rabbi Bar Shila, says to Eliyahu, he says, I don't understand why he won't listen to Rabbi Meir's Torah, why God won't recite it. He says, Rimon Matzah, he found a pomegranate, which is the Torah of Elisha ben Avuya, which is, right? And he says, Tocho achal klipato zara. The inner part he ate and the peel he threw away. Now, this sounds exactly like we're talking about the peel, the outer layer, the inner layer, right? There's all these connections, and it connects back to Elisha ben Avuya and all those stories. Anyway, we say here, even sinners like presumably Elisha ben Avuya and others still have good deeds, and those good deeds are going to take them and protect them. And when it says, Kepelach harimom rakatech, it's a pasuk from Shir HaShirim, Al tikre rakatech ela reikanim shebach. Right? It's not rakatech, your temples. It's the empty ones among you are still full like a pomegranate. Al acha kama v'kama, all the more so, they're not going to burn in hell. Okay, I just want to end with very short, because we have a big program tonight and I want to get to everything and keep it within an hour-ish. But what I want to talk about is how the Masechet started with this hakol chayavin. Everybody's part of this riyat Pnei Hashem at the Rega, right? To come, and in fact, Rabbanit Chana spoke beautifully about this last night, that there's the attitude of the Bavli is really that it's all about the sacrifice. That's what it means to go see Pnei Hashem. It's like a regular activity that we do. We bring sacrifices. But in the Yerushalmi, which was mentioned in a few occasions where they compare it to Hakel, and that all of a sudden these people who are exempt seem to be part of it, like the Katan, and that it's this activity to go somehow see God's face. Now, what does it mean to see God's face, right? Rabbanit Chana said, obviously, we don't really know what that means. But this idea of Riyat Pnei Hashem, that you're going to the temple to see God. Now, if we think about what's nice about this is Chagigah, and it connects to all the holidays. Moed is all about holidays. And holidays is always something that happens every once in a while, and you focus very much on it. And then during the year, you kind of forget about it. But the goal is that it's not just a one-time event, but that you take parts of it with you throughout your life. And when I read the end of this Masechet, I can't help but notice this idea about the people on the inside and the difference between the outside, the covering, and the inside. And I think about how we always live our lives and we judge people based on how they look and how they dress and what they do and their actions. And we're always judging people as much as we try not to. And as much as, right, people are always putting people into holes and pegging them. Right. My favorite story is in this Masechet about the two deaf people who, right, or the two mute people who hear but can't speak. And then one day they learn how to speak and they realize that they're full of Torah, right? On a personal note, I have a special needs daughter and I really relate to it because I always think you never really know what's going on and what she understands and there's this idea that we think we judge people and we look at them from the outside and we say, you know, this is really, you think you know who you're dealing with, what you're dealing with. And there's 3 times a year when we come to see God. And what does it mean to see God? To see God is to be in a different environment, right? We don't know what it means to see God, but somehow we remove these barriers of Am Haaretz, Chaverim, right? It all disappears for the moment. Now it comes right back. And that's the challenge, how to not let it come right back, right? But to somehow be in that environment where we can figure out a way not to judge people and not to assume that we understand who they are and what they are based on what they dress or what they say or how they act. And that's this, the Masechet started off, and I'm so excited because we have 2 occupational therapists speaking today toward the end of the Siyum. And I think there's this idea of the idea that we can really, once a year, a few times a year, we can try to have this idyllic space where it doesn't matter the tzipui, the inside, the outside, right? It's all about God is the only one who can see to our insides. And when we see God, it's almost like we can basically get beyond that. Okay, there's a lot more to develop there, but we don't have time, so we're going to stop here. We're going to finish our Masechet, Hadran al Chomer B'Kodesh, Uslik al Masechet Chagigah. What we're going to do right now is we're going to say the Hadrans. I'm going to share my screen and show you it on the screen. Then we're going to have a presentation from Maggie of our tapestry, that if you haven't yet joined, there's still plenty of time to do that. And then we're going to learn very briefly a little bit of the first Mishnah of Masechet Yevamot, and then we're going to start the rest of the program. Okay, here goes. Everybody ready? Okay. I'm going to start. Hadran alach Masechet. Okay, so just to remind you, if you're finishing just Chagigah, just say Chagigah. If you're finishing Seder Moed, also say this Seder Moed. Hadran alach Masechet Chagigah v'Seder Moed והדרך עלן. דעתן עלך מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, ודעתך עלן. לא ננשה מנך מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, ולא תתנשה מנן, לא בעלמא הדן, ולא בעלמא דעתה. הדרן עלך מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, והדרך עלן. דעתן עלך מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, ודעתך עלן. לא נתנשה מנך מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, ולא תתנשה מנן, לא בעלמא הדן, ולא בעלמא דעתה. הדרן עלך מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, והדרך עלן. דעתן עלך מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, ודעתך עלן. לא נתנשה מנך מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, ולא תתנשה מנן, לא בעלמא הדן, ולא בעלמא דעתה. יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שתהא תורתך אומנותנו בעולם הזה, ותהא עמנו לעולם הבא. חנינה בר פפא, רמי בר פפא, נחמן בר פפא, אחי בר פפא, אבא בר פפא, רפרם בר פפא, רחיש בר פפא, סורחב בר פפא, אדר בר פפא, דרו בר פפא. הערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ופי עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו כולנו צאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולמדי תורתך לשמה. מערבי תחכמני מצוותיך כי לעולם היא לי. יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך למען לא אבוש, לעולם לא אשכח פיקודיך, כי בם חייתני, ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן 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 סלע ועד. יהי רצון לפניך אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת חגיגה בסדר מועד, כן תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. וזכות כל התנאים ואמוראים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד לנו ולזרענו, שלא תמוש התורה מפינו ומפי זרענו עד עולם. ויתקיים בנו בהתהלכך תנחה אותך, בשוכבך תשמור עליך, והקיצותה היא תשיחך. כי ירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינה, בשמאלה עושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. Yasher kochachem, wow, amazing. What an amazing achievement for those who finished all of Seder Moed, and an amazing achievement for those who finished Masechet Chagigah. It was not an easy one. Okay, I'm going to turn over to Maggie.
We just have to say the dedications first.
Apologies for not remembering that earlier. Okay, Siyum Chagigah and Moed is sponsored by the Yehuza Women's Shabbat Shir in loving memory of Rabbanit Dr. Naomi Cohen, who passed away on Sunday, February 13th. She was a woman ahead of her time. She taught a Gemara class to women in Haifa starting in 1978, way before any other class of women studying Talmud. Courageously, she made Aliyah alone at the age of 19, right after the War of Independence. She was a university professor, a mother, a founding member of Kolech, an educator, and also a Rabbanit, the wife of the chief rabbi of Haifa, Shar Yashuv Cohen. Our study group, who had the great honor to study with the Rabbanit on Shabbat afternoons, and in some cases learn with her Gemara, believed that sponsoring a Siyum in her memory a fitting tribute to an amazing woman. May all women studying at Hadran find Rabbanit Dr. Naomi Cohen a role model, and may her memory be a blessing for all. And the Siyum Chagigah and Seder Moed is also sponsored by Michael Fishbane and sons Eitan Fishbane and Alicia Russ Fishbane in honor of Mona Fishbane's 75th birthday. Nice, I can see you right now, Mona. With gratitude to Michelle Farber on the wonderful daily podcast which guide Mona on her Daf Yomi journey. Okay, Maggie.
Okay, so what I want to show you is the Hadran tapestry, which we're very excited that many of you have taken part in. And we are now ready to show the world what we've been doing for, 2.5 years. Well, I guess 2 and a bit. This is the Hadran Women's Tapestry. We have over 100 women already on, and it is not too late if you'd like to join yourself. You can now find it here on the menu bar, where you used to find the form. You can now find the form over here on this button. The idea is here you can find women from New York, Honolulu, Ra'anana, Jerusalem, Hong Kong. Like, you'll just look around and you'll find that there's women in Hebrew as well as women in English. Here's Julie Mendelson. she's around. I saw her. And then I will show you what it looks like if you do share it with us, your video. I wanted to show you, this is really special. Sharona, if you're here, Mazel Tov, she did a Siyum at her wedding, and you can see it here.
So, this awful story that appears on Daf Yud Chet, and I think that's actually really apropos for a wedding.
She shared that with us. That's one example. Not a classic example, because I don't expect you all to have shared a Siyum at your Kiseh Kala, but it's nice that our world has come to a place where that is something that's normal. Another example I wanted to show you. Okay, we're going to leave it for now, but I think I left you curious. Please send in and submit your own tapestry if you haven't yet. We'd love to see your face over here. And thank you to all those of you who did take part. And here's our winner of the set of Yevamot. Mazal tov, everybody.
We've had pictures in Antarctica. It's amazing that Barbara studied in all 6 continents other than Australia, not Antarctica, which you would have thought. Okay, we're now going to start the first mission of Yevamot. Now, I know you're all a little bit daunted by Yevamot and the thought of it and what does this mean and all that. So I'm going to throw you into it. I'm not going to give you all the background today. That's for tomorrow. Okay. Yibum, what it is and all that. But the basic idea is a man dies without children. You want to keep his name going. Now, one of the things we did besides the bookmarks, which I hope you all got, and if you didn't and you want to order, we'll open orders again for those who didn't get to order yet down the road. But that will be your number one, your first guide. Your second guide are going to be these amazing, we have a staff of women that worked on this many, many hours to create this amazing visual that we're gonna use. Okay, so here goes. We're gonna learn our first Mishnah. We're gonna learn just a small piece of it. First Mishnah is very complicated, but you'll see with these pictures is gonna make it much easier. Okay, there's 15 women. Okay, I'm gonna just go through the English here that basically are gonna, if you fall to Yibum to somebody which means basically your husband died, you didn't have children, and you're supposed to marry his brother, but his brother is forbidden to you for some reason because you're somehow related to his brother. Okay, we'll see there's going to be all different kinds of ways. Not only do you not have to do Yibum, but we're going to see that also if he had another wife, all these cases are going to be, people have multiple wives, even though it was actually really super uncommon in those days, just so you know. Okay, so here goes our case. We're going to start learning. So what it says is, number one, we have the first case is Bito. Okay, so here we have Reuven. He has a daughter named Yael, and Yael and Reuven has a brother, Shimon. Okay, then what happens? Yael marries Shimon. So she marries her uncle, which you might think is forbidden, is actually okay. She marries Shimon, and Shimon has a wife named Shula. Okay, so what we want to know is not only how is Yael going to be, right? Yael now, if she falls to Yibum, if Shimon dies, let's see right now, Shimon dies, so Yael becomes exempt and from Yibum because she's supposed to marry Shimon's brother, which is Reuven. So basically, right, this is Keshem Shebito Ptura, since he can't marry. Now, it's always going to be from the perspective of the man who's supposed to do Yibum. He's supposed to marry Yael, but he can't because it's his daughter. So, of course, he can't marry her. I'm reading you like a clip from the Mishnah, just so you understand. We'll read this all tomorrow. Kach tzarata ptura. Since she's exempt, when Shimon dies, it really doesn't matter. One of his wives has to do Yibum. Once one wife does it, the other one doesn't have to. So you might think Shula should marry Reuven, but she can't because just like Yael is exempt, she exempts the tzara. The tzara is a name for a second wife. That's a whole other story, why we call her tzara, which is troubles, right? We all know second wives cause trouble. Anyway, now what happens? The next case in the Mishnah is tzarat tzarata, the tzara of the tzara. So this is a much more complicated case. Enter into the picture, not just the Reuven and Shimon are the only brothers, because that case was they were the only brothers. And then, of course, Yael can't do Yibum because there's no one to marry. But if there's a third brother, Levi, you see they're all color-coded. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are all the same color because they're all brothers. So Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Shimon dies. No one can marry Reuven because Yael is exempt, and then so is Shula. But Levi's in the picture. And then Shula does Yibum, this is the sign for Yibum, with Levi. And Levi happens to have another wife, Ruchama. If Levi dies, which is the next stage, then again, they fall to Yibum to Reuven. Now you might think, Well, Shula was exempt from marrying Reuven because of Yael, but Ruchama, she's already so disconnected from Yael, but no, that's what Sarat Sarata is. Not only is Yael exempt, not only is Shula exempt, right? At this point, Yael isn't even in the picture because Yibum is for Levi, who has Shula and Ruchama. But because Shula is exempt from marrying Reuven from the beginning, also Ruchama is going to be exempt. And then the Mishnah continues to say, well, by the way, if we go back to the beginning, if Yael happens to die first, before Shimon died, okay, so here Yael dies, which means that Shula, it was only connected to Reuven through Yael. So let's read the words for a minute. Ketzadim metu tzarotehem mutarot. Okay, if metu, if she dies, then the tzarot, okay, I didn't draw the whole picture out, but if there was another brother and another wife, all those people would have to do Yibum again, because once Yael's out of the picture, then the whole relationship and the whole connection is kind of, as you call, shattered almost. And then Shula is permitted to marry Reuven. Okay, that's case one in the Mishnah that we got to. There's going to be 15 cases like this, and that will be my job tomorrow to explain that all to you properly. Okay, I hope that was a little bit of a good intro, and now we're going to move on to the next part of our program. So I'm excited to invite Dr. Alana Steinhain to speak. What we tried to do this Siyum was to bring back a bunch of the speakers from Moed that we had heard throughout. And she is the director of faculty at the Shalom Harmon Institute. And she initiated a course called Talmud from the Balcony, which is a way of kind of zoom out, okay, which is something we don't do as much in Daf Yomi, zoom out and view it from the balcony, not the idea of women in the balcony, but no, more a bird's eye view, looking from above. So I'm going to have Alana share some words with us.
Thank you, Rabbanit Farber. It is great to be here. Mazal Tov to everybody who is being Mesayemet today and Mesayem. It is just wonderful to be a part of this. Always a morale boost. I want to spend a few minutes talking about how the idea of Kedushat Hazman, of sanctity of time, running through Seder Moed, is actually related to how we think of our connection to nature. If I were to ask you to tell me what the difference between, or a main difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov is, my guess is some people would mention, well, Shabbos has more comprehensive Isurim, whereas Yom Tov you can cook, for example, or you don't need an Eruv. Some people might say, oh, well, I learned Masechet Rosh Hashanah, so I know that while Shabbat Kav'a Nafsha, Shabbos comes whether you declare it or not. When it comes to Yamim Tovim, it's dependent on the Beit Din declaring the new month and then knowing that a holiday starts 10 days later or 10 days later or 15 days later or the day of, in the case of Rosh Hashanah. But what I've started to realize lately is that actually a major, major difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov is that Shabbat is not based at all in anything natural. There is no natural phenomenon that you can connect Shabbat to. Look in nature on Shabbos. Try to figure out, how do I know today's Shabbat? Whereas for Yom Tov, because it's connected back to Rosh Chodesh, it's connected to the movements of the moon. And so I want to focus for a few minutes on what exactly is going on here with having a type of Kedushat Hazman that is not completely disconnected from nature, and the type of Kedushat Hazman, which is basically the rest of them, which is very much connected to nature. But as we know from learning Masechet Rosh Hashanah and others, the rabbis were able to manipulate that a little bit as well. So I want to introduce you to a conversation between the Roman and the rabbi. And by that, I mean Turnus Rufus, and Rabbi Akiva. We usually know Turnus Rufus and Rabbi Akiva from the death scene of Rabbi Akiva, that Turnus Rufus puts him to death. But here they have a different conversation. And this is not from the Gemara, it's from Breshit Rabbah. But nonetheless, I think it connects. Sha'al Turnus Rufus at Rabbi Akiva. Turnus Rufus says to Rabbi Akiva, Mi Omar Shayom Shabbat. How do you know today's Shabbos? I can't look around and tell. So Rabbi Akiva kind of tries to push him off. Amar Lo, he says, well, Nahar Sambatyon Yuchriach. There's a particular river called the Sambatyon River, which tells you that it's Shabbat Shehu Moshe Chavanim Kol Yemot HaChol v'Shabbat Hu Nach. That all during the week, it continues to run, but it stops on Shabbat, which actually is in some of the histories, like Roman histories, that they suggest there was a particular river that stops every 7 days. But really, you can't really tell that it's Shabbat. And in the end, Turnus Rufus doesn't accept that. But Turnus Rufus says to him, Amar lo, he says, if it's true, Shakadosh Baruch Hu rotzeh b'chvodah shel Shabbat, that God wants today to be Shabbat, and it's Shabbat for that reason only, just because God chose it, not because there's something in the cycle of the world and the universe and nature, but God chose it. Well, then, al yashev ba'aruchot, then no winds should blow. Al yared b'gishamim, no rain should fall. Al yatzmach ba'esev, we shouldn't have any grass growing on Shabbat. Meaning, Turnus Rufus thinks there has to be a connection between nature and Shabbat, which is not surprising in a Greco-Roman thought process where it's about nature and the aesthetic and nature rules, right? And their whole pantheon of deities is based on nature. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, I'm trying to tell you, God is above nature. Amar lo, he says, tipach rucho shelo to'aish, drop dead Turnus Rufus. Emsholach hamashal, I'll give you the proverb, lama davar domeh, lechad shadar b'chatzero. God is like one who's sitting in God's own backyard. If that's the case, even on Shabbat, you'd be able to carry it in your whole backyard because it's your personal space. Because God is in charge of the entire physical world. God can do whatever God wants on Shabbat. In other words, this conversation is, how come revelation, Shabbat, God's law, doesn't match up to nature? And Rabbi Akiva's answer is because God is above nature. That is a major postulate of our religion. Now, what happens when we get to Yom Tov, where Yom Tov is actually based on Kiddush HaChodesh, which is based in nature? It's based on seeing the new moon. Well, take a look at something like this. And I want to assure Michelle that I'm going to stick to my time. I'm going to stick to my time, Michelle. I have a timer. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Chia Chazye L'Sihara, Rabbi Chia saw the moon, the Havakai B'Tzafra the Esrim V'Tisha. He saw the moon, but it was the old moon in the sky on the morning of the 29th of the month. Shakal Kala Pitak Bay, and what he did is he took a clump of earth and he threw it at the moon. Amar L'Orta Be'inan L'Kedushebach, you're the wrong moon. Tonight, we need to sanctify you to make the new moon. What are you doing here? Go cover yourself. We don't want this moon. We don't want the old moon. We want the new moon. And then Amar Le Rabbi, the Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi said to Rabbi Chia, Zil Ein Tav, go to this other place called Ein Tav, and declare the new moon tonight, even though over here we all saw the old moon. Ushlach li simana, and send me a sign once you've done it. Meaning over and over again, despite the fact that the new moon, the Kiddushat HaZman of the new moon, and ultimately of the Chagim, seems to be based in nature, over and over again, we see Chazal say, but if we don't want to use that version of the new moon, even though it's right there, nature is telling us it's not Rosh Chodesh yet, we're still going to say it's Rosh Chodesh. Or nature told us it was Rosh Chodesh yesterday, but our Eidim only came today. There's something here that's imitating the idea that we're not going to get stuck in nature, but actually we're going to be able to dictate something about nature. And I want to spend a minute, because that's what I have, talking about this. Shabbat is an expression that God is master over nature, over the universe. Haraya, we don't see anything in nature that points to Shabbat. It's just fiat. Yom Tov is an exemplification of how God wants us to partner with God in relating to nature. And that means that sometimes we accept things as they are. The new moon is now, and therefore we say it's Rosh Chodesh. And other times we're going to take wheat and we're going to make it into bread. Other times we're going to take a baby and we're going to give them a Brit Milah. We're going to change the way that nature looks. And in Chazal, and there's more to it, but in Chazal, I think that this connects to a broader theme of us partnering with God to change situations that seem natural. Whether it's a situation like, well, the wheat grows from the ground that way, so maybe we should just eat it that way. Or the baby is born that way, and according to a Greco-Roman aesthetic, we shouldn't give it a Brit Milah because nature gave it to us and nature is God. That's not our perspective. But there's also a moral dimension, because sometimes we think that things are naturally the way they are. The strong beats the weak. That's the law of nature. Kill or be killed. And we, as a people, not only create bread out of wheat, but we challenge what other people would say is the natural state of affairs. And I can only imagine right now the morality of nature of kill or be killed that we see going on in Eastern Europe, for example. That's a morality that Hashem actually pushes us against. Mazel tov.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Ayelet Hoffman-Libson, who is a professor of law at the IDC, Law and Connecting with Talmud, Talmudic Law, and she's been doing amazing introduction. She's taken it upon herself to do an introduction to every Masechet. At the end, we'll make you do the first few that we didn't do. And we're very happy. I hope you are all enjoying them and listening to them. And if you're not, you should start listening. Every Masechet they go up, they both go on the podcast, on the RSS feed, and they're also on our site. So please, on YouTube. So please, everybody, enjoy Ayelet's Torah. And here, without further ado.
Michelle, it's so exciting to be here, and really finishing all of Seder Moed is such a huge achievement, and it's a joy to be here with you tonight. I want to focus on something that stands in the backdrop of all of Seder Moed, and I think for us as people living Jewish life in the 21st century, it's something that seems very obvious and trivial, but actually when we go back, we can notice that one of the greatest revolutions that Chazal brought into Jewish life was a revolution that had to do with Seder Moed and with Jewish time. So if we look back to the biblical worldview and we think about where sanctity is found in the biblical world, then there's actually three different vectors of sanctity. One is the sanctity of time, where we see Shabbat, interrupting the week and giving a break to people, and obviously against the backdrop of Egypt and of the ancient world in general. This was one of the greatest revolutions of the Bible, but also the Chagim, also the cyclical time, the cyclical year and the week, that a person is actually living their life all the time in reference to holy time. But we also have two additional vectors. We have the sanctity of space, right? The way that space is organized in the biblical books is in a circular way, with the Mishkan and afterwards the Mikdash at the center. And the sanctity of the Mishkan, or afterwards the Mikdash, emanates out so that Jerusalem has sanctity, and afterwards all of the land of Israel has a certain degree of sanctity. So that's the second vector. And the third vector is the vector of the sanctity of the person, or human sanctity, which has to do with the different levels of sanctity that, first of all, Am Yisrael is considered Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. And even within the people of Israel, then we have the Kedusha of the Levim and we have the Kedusha of the Kohanim. And these three vectors intersect on the one day that typifies most the biblical idea of sanctity, which is the day of Yom Kippur, when the most sacred person, the Kohen HaGadol, goes into the most sacred place, the Kodesh HaKodashim, on the most sacred day of the year. So we have the person, the place, and the time all intersecting. But I want to ask the question of what's going on with everybody else, right? When we think about Yom Kippur, and in general, more broadly, the festivals in the biblical worldview, well, everybody else is pretty passive. All of the sacred work that is done, I'm not talking about Shabbat now, but I'm talking about the various Moadim, it's all concentrated in the temple. It's not only on Yom Kippur, but also on Sukkot or on Pesach, in general, the Regalim, perhaps also Rosh Hashanah, although this isn't as clear, and certainly Yom Kippur. So the temple is very, very central to the biblical view of the festivals. while what happens everywhere else is not really described so much, or not described as something that is central to the Chagim. Now, the Tanakh itself already juxtaposes the sanctity of place, the Mishkan, with the sanctity of Shabbat. And we saw in Masechet Shabbat that the rabbis derive from this that the building of the Mishkan actually takes a back seat to the observance of Shabbat. And the sanctity of time in the worldview of the rabbis trumps the sanctity of space. And I think that this is it's not by coincidence, because the rabbis were actually living in a reality which didn't have that temple at the core. That vector of the sanctity of space had been dropped out from under their feet. And they had to cope and think about, what do they do with that? How do they create a reality that will preserve sanctity without the temple? And so we see this all over Masechet Moed, but I want to focus for a moment on the takanot, that the decrees that were instituted by Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and are described in the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah. And there we hear about a variety of decrees, and also we hear about Rabban Yochanan's other decrees in other places in the Mishnah, but I want to focus on three that have to do with the Chagim. First of all, the Mishnah says that in the time of the temple, then the Tki'ah b'shofar would happen in the temple. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted, after the destruction of the temple, that the Tki'ah b'shofar should take place outside of the temple as well, particularly in a place where there was a Beit Din. Another decree was that the lulav that had been a central part of the ceremony in the Mikdash during Sukkot, also should be instituted for 7 days, not only in the temple, but also outside of the temple. And there the Mishnah explicitly says that this is in memory of the period of the temple. And I want to adduce another example, another case, another takana described elsewhere, where Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted the takana that the Kohanim should bless the people not only in the Mikdash, but also in the synagogue. So we see that through all of these takanot, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is responding to the destruction of the temple, in contrast to some of his colleagues who said, now there's no temple, we can't drink wine anymore, we can't eat meat anymore, we just have to mourn. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, in contrast, is very practical. And he says, let's take these practices that were part of temple life and we'll expand them and make them the basis of Jewish ritual outside of the temple. And he does this by strengthening the institutions of the Beit Din and the institution of the synagogue, but also the institution of the home. Because when he says that people should litol lulav in their sukkah or in their home, that's an individual action. So the real revolution of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was to have the wisdom to take the temple practices and the different vectors that intersected in the biblical worldview and expand them out so that they would be relevant for each individual, and to create a new form of Jewish life where we remember the temple through many of the rituals that we practice, but they also have the opportunity to gain new meaning, whether in the synagogue, whether in the institutional structure of the Jewish community, or through the Jewish home. And so our festivals and our festival cycle become part of a new Jewish ritual that has ties to the old, has ties to the past, but can also expand its sanctity by taking on new meanings and new understandings of ritual and of the cyclical forms of Jewish life that are created through abiding to these chagim. Mazal tov to everyone, and good luck on the next part of the journey.
Thank you very much. We're moving from Kedusha to Kedusha. So we talked about all different kinds of Kedushot in Moed, and now we're going to move to the Kedusha of women and marriage, and also another sanctified topic. Amazing that it's International Women's Day, and we're starting Seder Nashim. And with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Leah Sarner with our introduction to Seder Nashim. Dr. Rabbanit Leah, as you might already know, she taught this amazing beginners class in Gemara. Those who haven't taken it, it sits on our site and you can watch it at any time. And she's the Associate Director of Education at Trisha and also the Director of the High School Program at Trisha. And Rabbanit Leah, we'd love to hear from you. Introduction to Seder Nashim.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Thank you to Rabbanit Farber and the Hadran team for having me back. And a huge mazel tov to everyone. It's such a tremendous accomplishment. Whatever you learned, shkach to you. But today we're making a left turn kind of out of the world of Moed and into the world of Nashim. Moed, as you've just heard, is really exactly what it claims to be. It's a Seder all about the unique contours of Jewish time. But if you asked me to name this next Seder, I would not have named it Nashim, which means women. I would have called it Milim. I would have called it words. And the most obvious reason for that is that Seder Nashim features the Masechet of Nazir and Nidarim, which have very little to do specifically with women. And in fact, the Gemara in Nazir, the opening lines of the Gemara in Nazir, raise exactly this question. The Gemara says, Michdei, let's see, Tana b'Seder Nashim Kai. The Tana is teaching, the Mishnah is teaching the order of Nashim, Seder Nashim, my time atane Nazir. Why are we talking about a Nazir? And that's the opening lines of Masechet Nazir. And I'm gonna not tell you the Gemara's answer now. You can find that out in January when we get there. But to me, that question is a very powerful one. And that's why I think Seder Nashim is really actually all about words and the most powerful possible words. The 20th century philosopher J.L. Austin wrote a book called How to Do Things with Words. And I think that's basically what our Seder is about. Austin's book is a series of lectures that he delivered at Harvard in 1955. And in it, he describes a type of speech which he calls a performative. Words that make something so. He uses things like marriage, naming, placing bets. Those are his core examples. And today, philosophers more commonly refer to these types of words as speech acts. And the Gemara, Nidarim, let's say, vows are kind of obviously speech acts. In Judaism, a neder, when taken correctly, has the force of essentially making something a mitzvah for you. That's a really big deal. So obviously we're going to have an entire masachet about how to use your words correctly and carefully and what various words do or do not entail. And Nizirut works in very similar ways. But the rest of Seder Nashim is all about those exact same principles. Kiddushin, for example, betrothal is the binding of one life to another. It's the creation of a new family unit, and that is performed with words spoken in the right way, at the right time, but nevertheless, hugely important, transformative words. Ketubot are contracts. Those are written words that are witnessed and that are binding and that protect women in their marriages. Sota, a woman can't become a sota until her husband speaks words of kinui, which is forewarning. That's how he forbids her from being with the man he suspects her of having an affair with. Of course, the sota ordeal itself, very well known, involves the literal dissolving of words. Gitin is the unraveling of kiddushin, and there are words too. Gitin has both written and spoken words. Yevamot can only come into existence, obviously, after the powerful words of kiddushin are spoken, and chalitza, which breaks apart Yevamot, is similarly, once again, effectuated with words, actions as well, but words. Seder Nashim doesn't just exist, though, in this kind of word-filled vacuum devoid of real-life circumstances. No, what it's really about is when those powerful words hit the harshness and difficulties of real life. So Yevamot is like the most obvious possible example of that. You have a couple, they use the words of Kiddushin to make each other a promise of family, of continuity, of name, of legacy, carried forward through love and through children. And then what happened to those words, right? Because the husband died before that promise could come into fruition, before there were children. So how do those commitments, how do those words then live on in this new tragedy-filled reality? The answer is Yevamot, levirate marriage, or the words can be broken through different words, through chalitza. How do those options play out in the most complex families you could ever imagine? That's what we'll be scratching our heads about for the next few months. But I want you, as you're kind of scratching your head through that tzarot of the tzarot, to really not lose sight as you learn your way through this very complicated Masechet, but all of Seder Nashim, of what it's really about. And what it's really about are human commitments that are made through the strongest, most powerful kinds of words and speech acts available to us, and their fragilities. The fragilities when those words were spoken accidentally, spoken in a moment of anger, under duress, without full knowledge and understanding, or fragilities when those powerful holy commitments encounter tragedy, poverty, sickness, pain, struggle. The Torah opened with the extraordinary potential of words, the creation of something out of nothing through speech. But only Hashem is, in the words of the psalmist, Amar vayahi hu tziva v'ya'amod, Hashem spoke and it was, he commanded and it endured. That's Hashem. Humans too can create with words, but that doesn't mean what will be, and that doesn't mean it will endure. Human attempts at creation with words. That's Seder Nashim. Go study, enjoy.
Amazing. Wow. I never thought about it that way. It's really, now I have a whole theory because of the next Darim after that. Okay, we have time. Okay, so now to the second part of our program, which is going to be a very unique part. First of all, stay till the end. We have Suri Davis Stern, who is basically finishing Shah. She started in Yevamot, so there's going to be your big inspiration, which is not always the easiest place to start, although someone last night, also Deb Rosen, finished. Mazal tov to her. She finished last night with us, and she said it was her absolute favorite Masechet. So there you have it. So for those who are daunted, not to worry. And right now, what I wanted to just connect to some idea that I didn't get to fully develop when we finished the Masechet, which is this idea that in the lack of temple, we have other ways in which we can create this ideal world of where we break down all the barriers of how we normally judge people. And one of the things I love about the Hadran community and community of learners is that it really breaks down all the boundaries. And it's why we love having community speakers come and speak, and everybody brings their profession to the table. They bring their insights, their life experience. And we're lucky today to have two occupational therapists who, since the beginning of this cycle, have been taking notes and communicating with each other about all sorts of things that relate to their jobs. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Naomi Ferziger and Debbie Gvir.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening. I'm Debbie Gvir.
And I'm Naomi Ferziger.
We're so thrilled to take part in the Siyum, and first we want to open B'chvod Sanya. Thank you, Hadran, and especially Rabbanit Michelle, for enabling us, Chadashim Libkarim, each day afresh, to learn with you on the live 710 Zoom. Learning Daf Yomi with you has enriched our lives and has deepened our learning and our spirituality. And who knew when we embarked on the journey that our 710 Chavrutot would become real Chavrutot, sharing insights on the Daf and life experiences together.
Debbie and I have known each other professionally as occupational therapists for a long time. Over the past year and a half, we've been engaged in professional conversations surrounding the Daf, collecting ideas over WhatsApp and discussing topics that jump out to us from the Daf in a professional context. Tonight, we selected a few of the many ideas that we've collected throughout Seder Moed. In the field of occupational therapy, we focus on helping individuals participate in activities and occupations which are meaningful and important to them, achieving personal goals. In brief, this process requires first analyzing in great detail the components of an activity, secondly, honing in on the skill set necessary for the individual to perform the activity, assessing abilities as well as challenges. And thirdly, devising strategies which can be helpful to enhance performance and involvement. At the beginning of Masechet Chagigah, Chazal focused on the participation of individuals in the meaningful ritual activity of mitzvat ha're'iyah, aliyah l'regel to the Beit HaMikdash on the holidays. Hakol chayavim bere'iyah chutz mi. All are obligated in re'iyah except for. Here we see inclusion as well as exclusion, but we also see the challenges and limitations that arise for individuals to perform this mitzvah. Chazal note the motor challenges of young children and ask, Ezehu katan? How do we define a katan, a little child who is not yet obligated to go to Har HaBayit with his father? The rabbinic discourse, first in the Mishnah and achar kach afterwards in the Gemara, focuses on motor development. Beit Shammai says the katan is mi she'eino yachol lirkov aktefo shel aviv, one who doesn't have enough trunk stability to straddle his father's shoulders as he makes his way through the crowds on the way to the Beit HaMikdash. Beit Hillel states the katan is kol she'eino yachol la'alot v'le'echotz biyado shel aviv, one who is not able to walk alongside his father holding in his hand, a higher level of motor development. Like the child, the Mishnah and the Gemara mention others who are not independent walkers and are not able to, and who are also exempt from re'iyah. For example, the chiger, the suma, the chole, the azaken, the blind, sick, elderly, one who limps or is an amputee. Rava adds, those who can't perform re'iyah and go up to aliyah l'regel by foot are le'atuye mefanke. A possible sensory limitation is identified here by Rashi, who explains mefanke as those who cannot walk barefoot, a requirement for worship in the Beit HaMikdash. From an occupational therapy perspective, this alludes to those who may be challenged due to motor disability or a sensory sensitivity.
The Gemara on Daf Vav Amud Aleph again uses the word mefanke in regard to Shmuel, who was not brought to Shiloh, though according to Rebbe, he could already straddle his father's shoulders. It appears that Chanatu recognizes a sensory or developmental motor challenge that would undermine meaningful participation for Shmuel and probably for his dad Elkanah as well in Mitzvat Riyah. It is interesting to consider that when Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt, with today's technology and adaptive devices, the potential that exists to enable inclusion in Mitzvat Riyah for other groups as well. Another idea we want to share with you this evening is taken from Yom Yutet, which discusses the Kohen Gadol on the night of Yom Kippur, who was not allowed to sleep that night. We're now going to point out some strategies used by the Pirchei Kuna who kept him awake and alert. It says, Matanitim, Bikesh li'itnamnim, Pirchei Kuna makin lefanav, be'etzba, tzreda, etc. After Rav Yehuda explains that tzreda is agudal, a thumb, he models, just as we would in therapy, why the sound of finger snapping would be appropriate for keeping the Kohen Gadol up at night. By the way, the words tzridat etzbaot is used in modern day Hebrew, meaning just that, finger snapping. In fact, finger snapping is part of the well-known hand function assessment used by occupational therapists today. Going back to the night of Yom Kippur, though, the Daf in Yoma continues to elaborate on additional sensory strategies to keep the Kohen awake. The Pirchei Kuna had the Kohen Gadol perform a kidah, a special bowing, perhaps like a handstand. Rav Steinsaltz explains, "Kashe ma'od la'asoto, v'al yedei ma'amatz zeh haya mitorer." It was a very difficult position to perform, and the exertion would arouse him. It seems to us that the motor planning aspect required to perform the kidah, combined with the sensory input and the physical exertion, served as an arousal strategy. Remember, no coffee that night.
An additional sensory stimulating activity is mentioned. The Pirchei Kuna would sing to the Kohen Gadol, providing him with the necessary environment to maximize his performance on the holiest day of the year. We as occupational therapists often recommend a variety of sensory, motor, cognitive, or metacognitive strategies to enhance achieving personal occupational goals. Perhaps a bit less lofty than that of the Kohen Gadol, it's significant and meaningful for our clients.
One of an occupational therapist's expertise is evaluation and treatment of writing disorders. It was hard not to get excited about the discourse in Megillah, Daf Bet, Amud Bet, regarding the end letters, the Otiot Sofiot, Mem Sofit, Nun Sofit, etc., which many of our clients have difficult forming or even remembering, and viewing the mnemonic device that is mentioned there, followed by a discussion, a very important one, about Chidushei Torah. It says there, V'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, v'itema Rabbi Chia bar Abba, mansepach, Sofim Amaro. Rabbi Yirmiyah, and some say it was Rabbi Chia ben Abba, mentions that the prophets created these end letters, which they simply called mansepach. In there are all those Otiot Sofiot. Guess what? I've tried it. The strategy works. I've already tried it out on a client.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to share a few thoughts from Seder Moed from an occupational therapy perspective.
And Yishar Koach to everyone taking part in Siyum Seder Moed.
Thank you so much. That was really great. I'd now like to welcome Suri Davis Stern to share with us some words as she's nearing her end of her 7.5-year journey. So Suri Davis Stern is both an attorney, which she'll talk about, I think, in her connection to the learning, and is very active in, number one, the Five Towns community in general, the Jewish community, and particularly also in the Hadran Long Island group.
Thank you for inviting me to come, Rabbanit Farber. I have to thank you because I'll tell more detail, but after 30 years of learning basically on my own, it was nice to have discovered a group of women who enjoy learning Torah as much as I do, and took away the individuality and perhaps at times loneliness of learning on my own to have a group in which to celebrate Torah. I'll start with the Alter Rebbe. I learned Tanya Yomi, and just this week in chapter 34, the Alter Rebbe says, how do we build a mishkan in each one of us? It says, V'shachanti b'tocham. We all know the famous midrash, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to dwell within us. So the Rebbe asks, with the Beis HaMikdash destroyed, how is it that we have the Beis HaMikdash within ourselves? And that is to learn Torah. So I started in 1974, my Zaidi, Rabbi Chaim Davis, was living in Far Rockaway, and Rabbi Pelkovitz, the rabbi of the White Shul, and he had a discussion about bringing Daf Yomi to the Five Towns. My grandfather, my Zaidi, was the Gabbai Rishon in Torah Vadas in Williamsburg, and they had moved from Brooklyn to the Five Towns in 1965. And Rabbi Pelkovitz and my Zaidi created the first Daf Yomi group in the Five Towns in the White Shul. My father, Alav HaShalom, completed Shas several times. And as I related to Rabbanit Farber, he was in the hospital doing well, and it was the Erev Shabbos, and I went to visit him, and I put on his talis and tefillin with him, and we said Shema, and I was asked to leave the hospital because it was in the middle of COVID, and an hour later, he was nifter. The last words were to my nephew, Srili. He asked, how is the daf? My nephew Suli had become a new Maggid Shir in Daf Yomi, and the very last word on his lips was daf, and he had completed Shas many, many times. So this little story is Eloi Nishmas Harav Reuven Ben Chaim. At age 26, after 5 years of learning Parsha every single Friday, when my father went to shul on Friday night, I decided one year at age 26 to start learning Yehoshua, one perek a week. So when my father was in shul on Friday night, after my mother ben Shlich, I started Sefer Yehoshua. And then after Yehoshua, one perek at a time, I started Shoftim, and then Shmuel and Malachim. And after 14 years of one perek at a time, at age 40, I made a siyum for 90 women in the White Shul for Tanakh, my Siyum Tanakh. And I just decided that my theme was going to be Tipa Achat, in honor of Rabbi Akiva, who saw a drip of water on a stone. And he saw that even though it was just one drip at a time, that it made a deep impression on the stone. And I wanted to enervate and motivate the 90 women that were there to just start with a pasuk, start learning just to build that Mishkan inside of them. And many of them started, and that was 15 years ago. So from age 40 to 50, I started learning Mishnayot. It took me 10 years, la'at to finish Mishnayot. I had a CD. In those days, we had CDs. And I learned an art scroll, Mishnayot, every week. And at age 50, I finished Mishnayot. I made my Siyum at age 50 in memory of a boy who had died at an early age. And I was asked to give shiurim, and it was not something that I had done in the past, but I thank Marsha Behar, who asked me to start giving shiurim 25 years ago, for getting me really involved in not only learning Torah, but in teaching Torah. And now, of course, 7.5 years later, I'm learning Gemara. I'm finishing Gemara. And the question that was posed to me when I was together with my Long Island branch at our last Siyum was, Suri, you started at Yevamot and you actually continued on, but you have to understand that I'm an estate attorney and an estate law professor. And I've been a professor now for over 10 years. And in estate law, we have something called per stirpes, which is how the succession planning goes in case you don't have a will. So Yevamot was, hey, per stirpes person, on steroids. I was reveling in all the connections that were being made. And it was really very fascinating to me. If you all know, the Trader Joe's paper bags, I ripped them open every time I was with Yevamot, studied Yevamot, and I wrote the connections on these opened up, very big Trader Joe bags, and I was reveling in it. And I want to tell those who are starting Yevamot this. It's very important to me as an estate attorney to ensure that there is a legacy of my client, a legacy that properly frames the desire of my client. We have to understand that Yevamot is lahakim et shem hamez b'Yisrael, to create a spiritual legacy for a man who had the mitzvah of pru or vu that was never fulfilled. And we have to understand that it is so very important, this spiritual legacy, that the Gemara takes 244 amudim to discuss how we can honor a man who died childless after marrying, who didn't have somebody with whom he could leave a legacy. I wanted to also understand, I want you to understand that what motivated me, besides for Yevamot and all these 30 years, I want you to understand that what motivated me was my ability to say the Hadran and to say, Shelo yamush tamush Torah mipi umipi zari. Understanding that when I started at 26, I was single and I had no children. And it was always a hope that I would marry and have children. And as I did marry, I kept, as the Torah was my anchor over these 30 years, as I married and as I had children and as I raised adolescents, and as I am now marrying off my children, Kenai Nahara, I'm on number 2, and Im Yirtzeh Hashem, by June, I will have married off 3 children in 2 years over the pandemic, which was a nace in and of itself, but Torah was always my anchor. And the ability to say mipi umipi zari, v'tze'etze'enu v'tze'etze'e amcha beit Yisrael kulanu, in the darkest times, in the greatest times, that I worked the drip every time to say, get to that Hadran, to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he let me finish this, have this Siyum. And of course, in the Hadran, we ask Hashem that just as we finished and had the ability that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed us to have this Siyum, that we should both be Zocha to have future Siyumim. And that has lasted me even through cancer diagnoses, through divorce, through, as I said, child rearing. Torah was always my anchor. The Torah learning was always my anchor. The ability to say the Hadran and to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the continuity of generations harkens back to my Zaidi, who started the daf in the 5 towns, and to my father. And my daughter now is Emirat Hashem this Sunday will start her Bayit Ne'eman B'Yisrael. She loves learning Torah, and it's a legacy that I hope that each one of you bring not only to yourself and to your family, but to all Klal Yisrael, because as women, our Torah learning is honored. In the Haggadah, where it says At Petachlo, there was an understanding that Aleph to Taf, we are the Akeret Habayit, and it's we who instill this in our children. And Moshe Rabbeinu could not have drunk milk from a nursemaid. He had to drink the milk from his mother, the milk of Torah. As we have nursed our children in Torah and physically nursed our children with milk, we should all be zocha to take our Torah learning and give it to our children and to all Klal Yisrael. And as we get into the month of Purim, where Esther was our representative redeemer, and as we get into Nisan, B'Nisan Nigalu, Nisan Atidin Lihigael, we are the women who will bring the Geula, and our Torah learning and our roles as Akeret Habayit should be honored. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Very beautiful, very inspirational. Amazing to have started with Yevamot, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Okay, with that, we're going to end our evening. Thank you, everybody, for being part of it. Thank you to all the learners for all the support, and it keeps us going, just so you know. Thank you to Maggie for being my partner in everything. And thank you to Mimi, who's been working very hard to get the Yevamot and the bookmarks, and Mimi Shachad, who's been on our team for the last few months. And we have an amazing team. We have amazing women who helped us with the content, and I'm not going to mention them all by name. And thank you to all our amazing speakers tonight and always. And with that, we're going to end, as they say in Hebrew, Siyum b'ma shepatach. We're going to end with what we started. For those who missed the first 2 minutes, we're going to end with a great video that Maggie put together, just to end on a high with what we've done and accomplished over the last 2 years. Such a pleasure to welcome everybody here.
Mazel tov to everybody here.
How exciting it is that we have come this far.
Congratulations.
Mazal tov to everyone tonight celebrating.
Mazal tov. Mazal tov to all of you.
Mazal tov to all of you.
I've made it to yet another Siyum.
This is an amazing accomplishment.
To see it happening in front of my eyes.
To empower and inspire so many women.
It's one of the things that makes this truly an amazing thing.
We have become quite a community.
This is an amazing community.
We have like a real routine around this.
Yeah, I've started to understand the rhythm of it.
I've slipped behind many times.
But I keep going one day at a time.
The study of Daf Yomi was the most healing part of my day.
As a whole, it's a sweeping, magical ride.
It's an amazing thing that we should allow more young women to do.
And I wish you many continued years of successful Torah learning.
Lahadio, Torah, Ulahadira.
May our learning go from strength to strength.
And may you enjoy your learning tremendously.
Thank you, and good luck to us all.
And really, b'hatzlacha, I think this is going to be a great challenge.
A huge thank you to Rabbanit Michelle for taking us on this incredible journey.
Mazal tov to everybody. And thank you for all of you for being part of this. And as you all see, everybody brings their part to the table. And thank you to everybody. Mazal tov.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Excellent.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Long Island Peak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mazel tov, everyone. Good night.
Thank
you. Have a great day.
Thank
you for making time. Some of you on your very busy work days.
Thank you. And Maggie, thank you so much.
Bye.
And I only spelled it once. And really fell off my neck.
Thank you so much. It was very inspirational. The speakers were wonderful.
I think Kleenex should be sending you a bonus.
Thanks, Caroline. I needed that.
Always rely on Caroline.
All right, everybody. Mazel tov. See you.
Mazel tov. Thank you, everyone. Always great being together.
Thank you, Michelle.
To find other excuses to be together before the next 4 months Siyum comes along.
Mazel tov. Thank you.
חג שמח,